Hey folks, I'm Alex Dowd.
And I'm Katie Rife.
Spoiler alert. On today's episode, we're discussing, well, spoilers. No, not any specific spoiler for any specific movie. We're going to talk instead about the whole business of protecting movie secrets for the uninitiated. The history, the evolution, and the new extremes of spoiler alert culture.
Welcome to Film Club. In 2021, dancing around plot points in reviews and on social media is good etiquette, if not a studio-mandated commandment. But it wasn't always so. Pop cultural paranoia about spoilers, in other words, finding out the plot of a movie or a TV show before you watch it, is a relatively recent phenomenon, driven largely by 21st century technology. But first, as we often do here on the podcast, we must go back to Alfred Hitchcock and Psycho. Now, Dowd, I know I talk about Psycho a lot on the podcast. When we were talking about theatrical exhibition, I used it as a case study in time ticketing. But another innovation from the exhibition of Psycho back in 1960 was it was the first spoiler alert.
So we have Hitchcock to blame for this culture then, is what you're saying.
Not really. We'll get into who's really responsible for all of this, but he did innovate the spoiler alert with, so when Psycho was shown in theaters, part of the novelty of it, people waiting in line to get tickets to see a movie was a novelty at the time because, as we covered on our exhibition episode in more detail, if you're interested in this, before that, you would just buy a ticket to a movie and wander in and just watch whatever part of the movie you wanted to watch because it would show again. They just showed movies in a loop all day. You didn't buy a ticket for the 3:00 or whatever. You just showed up. And so while people were waiting in line to see Psycho, they had these pre-recorded tapes of Hitchcock kind of hyping people up for the movie. And real quick, we're going to play a clip of exactly what he said.
I insist that you do not tell your friends the little, tiny, horrifying secrets of Psycho after you see it.
Please do not tell your friends what happens at the end of Psycho.
It's a pretty brilliant gimmick on his part, and Psycho is in classic cinema one of the more spoilerable movies. Truly, I feel at this point everyone sort of knows the secrets of Psycho. It would be hard to find too many who don't know. I guess I would say if you have not seen Psycho, check it out. It's got a great twist.
It's a huge cornerstone of horror cinema. If you're interested in horror at all, you really need to watch Psycho.
Yeah. And actually has a couple twists. I should say, too, before we continue, this is going to, we sort of joked up front that giving this episode itself a spoiler alert, we're probably going to talk about a few of the major plot revelations of a few major movies. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of hard to get around it.
I promise we won't spoil Godzilla versus King Kong because we have not seen that yet. We don't know if Godzilla wins or King Kong wins. We don't know if there's another monster that shows up that they have to fight together. We don't know that yet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hoping will happen. And I don't know. We won't spend too much time on the Godzilla vs. Kong trailer, although I could talk about it for a whole episode. I feel like they're doing a little bit of WWE, what do they call it, K-Fab, where they set up a conflict and then give you a big old twist in the actual movie. So I think they're going to team up.
Yeah, it's sort of, because, we're sort of, this version of Godzilla, this particular franchise, the American Godzilla franchise that's been going since 2014, has sort of set up both of these characters as good guys, So the idea that, even the idea that King Kong is going to be, protecting us from Godzilla doesn't really square from the way that Godzilla has behaved over this franchise, which, I by the way, I love the 2014 Godzilla. I think it's a ton of fun. And my one beef with it really, though, is that even right there at the start, this version of Godzilla is kind of a good guy, and he's much better. He's much better as a villain, in my opinion. But
we'll have to talk about that in detail on our Godzilla episode because I love cuddly Godzilla.
Spoiler alert: we will be talking about Godzilla movies in the near future. So.
Well, you did mention that we will be talking about a few very famous films, and while we did play that clip from Psycho up top, that was a bit ahead of its time. Because spoiler culture, as we know it, didn't really exist in the form that it exists today. And as an example to kind of illustrate that, we're going to talk about one of the biggest spoilers, biggest twists in a movie of all time, which is The Empire Strikes Back. Has a huge twist at the end, and if you haven't seen The Empire Strikes Back, I'm very sorry. Darth Vader is Luke's father. But it's a huge cultural touchstone film that came out 40 years ago, so I'm not super worried about spoiling that one. However, just as an example, you look at the promotion surrounding The Empire Strikes Back. So Star Wars was not expected to be as huge of a hit as it actually was, and so everyone was kind of scrambling a little bit in the aftermath. And I have another clip here, which came from CBS Channel 2 in Chicago, which came out in early 1980, months before the film came out. And Gene Siskel was a big booster of Star Wars, and so I guess he got some special access. And he played footage from the climactic lightsaber battle between Luke and Darth Vader on TV months before the movie came out. And let's hear a clip of that real quick.
You're the first public audience to see these scenes in which young Luke Skywalker, rebel soldier, battles against the evil Empire leader, Lord Darth Vader.
The Force is with you, young Skywalker. But you are not a Jedi yet.
So he doesn't actually, there's not the moment where he says you are my, he just excerpts the clip of them fighting.
Yeah, he shows the climactic scene of the movie on television, which I just can't feel like people would be apocalyptic if that happened today.
Yeah.
And a more extreme example of that, actually, a friend of the show, Mike Vanderbilt, sent this to me. So this is a more extreme example of just kind of how different it was then. In 1978, there was a Star Wars convention, and David Prowse, who he played the physical manifestation of Darth Vader. James Earl Jones did the voice, of course. But David Prowse appeared at a fan convention in 1978, and I'm going to read you an excerpt here from this newspaper article. He offered a glimpse of a possible plot for the second sequel. Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, the young hero in the first film, played by Mark Hamill, are hooked up in a do-or-die lightsaber duet where Luke learns that Darth is, in fact, his long-lost father. Father can't kill son, son can't kill father, Prowse said. So they live again to star in Star Wars 4. And that, he said that to a room full of Star Wars fans. He told them how The Empire Strikes Back ends 2 years before the movie actually came out. And I think the difference here is, because, like now, if that happened at, say Comic-Con, the entire world would know about it within 15 minutes. But because it was the 70s, this appeared in a local newspaper and promptly died.
Right.
It wasn't...
Well, the internet didn't exist yet, really.
Right, exactly.
I mean, it did, but it barely existed. And this sort of culture of passing information around the internet and particularly movie information did not exist yet. So something really could exist something could drop in a local newspaper and never make it out of that town.
Right, exactly. If it wasn't picked up on the AP wire, no one outside of your town would hear about it. Spoiler culture, as we know today, really arose in the 2000s as a consequence of widespread access to the internet and the rise of social media. As we were saying, before the internet, your friend would have to go see The Empire Strikes Back in a different town and call you and tell you how the movie ended.
Right.
But now, with the internet, you could run into this information by mistake.
Right, yeah. So that's the real thing, right? Is that you can accidentally learn something you don't want to learn.
Yes.
Just by scrolling through social media or going to a website that's being careless about it or something.
Exactly. And something that happened around the same time is another change in movie culture is in the 2000s, and this is all parallel to the rise of, so-called nerd culture becoming mainstream, comic book movies and things like that, science fiction like Star Wars becoming huge blockbuster mainstream concerns. This was all kind of happening in parallel. And with that came what are called day and date releases around the world, meaning that a film comes out in every theater in America and around the world on the same day. And so before that, what was more common was what we see now with smaller indie films where they start in a big city and slowly roll out to other towns. And so I think that the culture changed where before it was normal to have to be patient to see a movie, and that takes some of the edge off of needing to know what happens right now, I think.
Yeah, I feel like as with everything, we come back to this again and again. You talked about coming back to Psycho, and I think Psycho is an extremely influential film. But with a lot of what we talk about with modern movie culture, when we do an episode where we talk about the state of the movie industry, a lot of this ends up coming back to Jaws and Star Wars and that generation of filmmakers, Spielberg and Lucas, who really did completely change this industry. And you can look back to Jaws and see that Jaws is one of the first films to open on a really mass number of screens, and part of that was also related to its advertising. It was advertised massively on television, which is something that was not big at the time. So yet again, we can blame this on Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, you know?
Well, even around the time of Jaws and before home video, novelizations were a big thing. And novelizations were part of this too, where you could read the novel based on the book. Let's say you live in Oklahoma City, you could read the novelization of the movie before the movie came to your town. So you would know what happened in the movie before you saw it.
Right.
But, in the early 2000s, like you said, you have these movies becoming global events, and it happens all at the same time. And also you see something around the same time was, around 2007 was the heyday of Lost. And water cooler TV. And this was another factor that was kind of shaping paranoia around spoilers. Now, if you remember Lost, that show was basically just one big long cliffhanger. There was nothing but cliffhangers on the Did you watch Lost, Dowd?
I have never watched Lost. That's a confession I have. I mean, I've seen an episode here or there, but I've never consistently watched it. I've been told that it's something that I would probably enjoy. Being a fan of, like, say, the X-Files, I've sort of heard of Lost as, like, kind of passing the baton to a new millennium's version of that in some respects. Most of what I know about Lost, though, comes down to intense dissatisfaction with where it went. People investing all of this, which is sort of the Abrams thing in a lot of ways. He's very good at building mysteries. He's less good at solving them.
I would argue that you can blame J.J. Abrams also for a lot of the paranoia around spoilers because, like I said, Lost was very based around cliffhangers, and it ended up being very dissatisfying because he posed a lot of questions and never answered any of them.
Right.
Which just enraged people because they became invested for years in keeping these secrets, from the uninitiated, and then it didn't even pay off. So people were very mad at the ending of Lost, which I understood. But then
it came down to advertising too, though, right? I mean, Abrams as an advertiser. I mean, I actually think that whatever his skills as a filmmaker, I do think he has some skill as a filmmaker. But I think as an advertiser, he's brilliant, and I think that a lot of his projects have become these experiments in how can we preserve the mystery of this project as well. I think about Cloverfield, which he obviously didn't direct, but he produced and was sort of advertised as a J.J. Abrams project. Cloverfield was all about what is this thing? That was the main question. And for months, they built this whole viral campaign around people trying to figure out what it is. And there's a moment where in the trailer where it sounds like somebody is saying it's alive, but it sounds like they might be saying it's a lion. So people assumed that this might be a stealth Voltron adaptation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so there was just all this speculation for months, and then the movie comes out, and it's a big kaiju thing. Sorry, spoiler for folks who have not seen Cloverfield. It's a Godzilla thing, kind of. It's an off-brand Godzilla. But that was an example of a film that did great because of how intensely the protection of spoilers was built into the very advertising of the film.
Yeah, I never really thought of him that way, but J.J. Abrams is a modern William Castle in a lot of ways.
Oh, big time. Just different techniques, For him, it's all about allure. It's all about how can we get people hooked on this thing, and they need to know something. I mean, think about the construction too of the new of The Force Awakens, those trailers, and how masterfully those trailers give us new information while withholding anything of substance, so that we're hooked on them. And you can sort of see that progression. And I don't know, maybe we'll get into this more later, but talking about the way that those trailers reveal a tiny bit more each time without really telling us that much about what the movie is going to be.
Oh, absolutely. I think The Force Awakens was really, well, we will talk more about Star Wars and Disney in a minute, but I think that what I remember is the hype around The Force Awakens was incredible.
Yeah.
And it had been 15 years, give or take, since there was 10 years maybe, since there was a new Star Wars movie. But I think that The Force Awakens was the first time that people started posting blog posts online that analyzed trailers frame by frame.
You're right.
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 But really, shortly before all that happened, a few years before all that happened, it was really Game of Thrones that solidified spoiler culture online and therefore in popular culture, because popular culture and online are pretty much the same thing now. Social media, pop culture, same difference. And that was because, I guess if you've never seen Game of Thrones, spoiler alert, there's a lot of shocking character deaths that come at unexpected times in that show. But there's an interesting phenomenon with Game of Thrones that kind of underlines the animosity between the spoiled and the unspoiled, is that all of these shocking events that were happening on TV were in the books. So if you had read the books and you were a longtime fan of George R.R. Martin and Song of Ice and Fire, you saw all this stuff coming. All the big shocking things that people were talking around the water cooler were not shocking to you. And so it created these two camps where you had the book readers and the TV watchers, those who knew what was going to happen and those who didn't. And that inherently creates a tension that made, don't spoil it, even more of a fraught proposition.
For sure. If I can give you an anecdote, I remember watching an early season of Game of Thrones. I got into the show in its first season, and I'm of the opinion, side note, that show was pretty remarkable for its first few seasons, and then kind of went off the rails a little bit.
One of the most disappointing drop-offs of anything I've ever been invested in, honestly.
Yeah, I guess that's not a controversial opinion, I suppose.
No, the last season sucked, man.
That's a discussion for a whole other day. I do think there are things in the last season that I do like, but let's say I get to an episode that may or may not feature a wedding, and I have not read the books, and I've just been going week to week and somehow avoiding being spoiled on this stuff, but I'm watching it with somebody who has read the books and is, I guess I would say, almost spoiling it. Like she is like, there's two people in the room who have both read the books, and they're both kind of like sending signals to each other that they know what's coming, and I can sort of
looking sideways across the room.
Yeah, and I can kind of sense that something is coming. I somehow made it to that scene without having it spoiled for me, and I'm glad, because that is one of the more shocking things I've seen on television. And you might argue, if you wanted to go further, this again is kind of a side note, that scene to me feels a little bit like Marion Crane in the shower in Psycho. It's like television's version of that. Like, this is the big moment that just it cuts this whole thing in half, and it says the thing you thought you were watching, it's not that.
Right, and there's another moment like that in the first season. I had not read the books. I watched the first season and just loved it. So I did read all the books in that year in between seasons. Okay. So, I kind of got to see Game of Thrones phenomenon from both sides of the fence, I guess.
Very interesting, yeah. I guess kind of the Marion Crane moment is in the first season. And that's sort of when the thing that you're watching tells you that you're not who you thought you were going to be watching and rooting for over this thing. Maybe it's time to make different plans.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was part of what I found so compelling about the show, was that it was very much like, no, this is not what you think it is. You think it's just some fantasy thing, with like wizards and dragons, and it is that, but it's something else too.
Yeah. I mean, for a while, it really felt, watching Game of Thrones, like anything could happen. And I don't mean, I don't mean that everything could happen. I really mean that, like, no character was safe. And at least for a good long while, that did not feel like a gimmick to me. It felt genuinely like we were watching a story that had harsh stakes and where you should not get comfortable, It was sort of the reason to watch it for a while,
Yeah, I think the fact that the Emmys started rewarding it in its later seasons is, I suppose, typical of award shows, because those first few seasons when it wasn't getting Emmys, the writing was very, very good. It was, serious adult drama, just in a fantasy realm.
For sure.
But anyway, we're going to go into a lot of things that could be other podcasts today. But, Game of Thrones as a worldwide phenomenon, and it being sort of the flashpoint for spoiler culture as we know it today, kind of speaks to spoilers as sort of being a byproduct of the franchise storytelling and the accompanying brand loyalty that is such big money in Hollywood now. So like one example of something you see and how the MCU was also a big driving force in creating this spoiler culture in the past decade was the rise of the post-credit scene that you would see at the end of an MCU movie that was like an Easter egg for future films. And you weren't supposed to, even saying that there was a post-credit scene was considered a spoiler. And
which is fucking ridiculous, by the way.
Yeah,
it's fucking ridiculous. Like,
people will get mad.
Well, yes, I know they will, and we'll get into more of that too. But yeah, I mean, I do think that Marvel is at least partially to blame for the place we're in right now, where this sheer amount of paranoia about spoilers, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Marvel built a whole franchise on delivering shocking cameos and on the constant revelation of something that they've been teasing for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the serializing of the MCU really upped the stakes in terms of spoilers. Like if you're just seeing an origin story of Iron Man, like if you're familiar at all with comics, you're already familiar with that story. But when you start getting into the later Avengers movies that have a serialized storyline, then, there's a lot more to give away, I suppose.
Yeah. I think what bothers me the most about spoiler culture, I think that this obsession with spoilers on the internet and this obsession with people who will get bent out of shape about any piece of information that they learn about a movie in advance. I think it comes down to what a blockbuster exists to do and what itch it's kind of scratching for audiences now. And I think we're kind of in an era where blockbusters are these giant plot machines that are constantly giving you new information. And I think it has a lot to do with the serialization of blockbuster cinema in that you'll see something that really just exists to give revelations to you, to reveal things to you. And I think that's what it comes down to, is that I think a lot of people are reacting to the fact that what they're really looking forward to when they see a new movie is just a series of shocking revelations. And of course, then knowing anything that happens in it would compromise that. So I think it's a bigger problem with our blockbuster culture. It's not just an obsession with spoilers. I think it reflects something larger about what might be kind of wrong with contemporary blockbuster filmmaking.
And part of this that that extends beyond Marvel is something that has become pretty common around 2015. I think was this around when this became pretty common, was dividing up the finale of your big blockbuster franchise into two parts, which again is ripe for cliffhanger endings and ripe for spoilers. Like Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows was famously a 2-part film, and the end of the Hunger Games series was famously 2 parts. Mm-hmm. And those were both based on books, which adds to that tension that we were talking about between the ones who know what's going to happen and the ones who don't. But just like, I think that this is a big change, ending a film on a cliffhanger and expecting people to pick up with the next one, I think is a big change. And to go back to The Empire Strikes Back for a minute, when you look up reviews for The Empire Strikes Back, which does end on something of a cliffhanger note, a lot of the reviews are criticizing the film for not having an ending. It wasn't as common back then for the movie to end on, come see the next movie next year.
Which now obviously is the whole model. I mean, you talk about Marvel, I mean, every one of these movies is, to some extent, an advertisement for the next one.
Absolutely. Yes.
And the way, I mean, I think bringing up Game of Thrones is astute, because I think in some ways, I do think it's interesting that that the finale of Game of Thrones came out the same month as Avengers Endgame. These both of these things sort of ending these stories that have these serialized stories that have been going on for many years, for close to a decade in the case of Game of Thrones, and a full decade in the case of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And both of them felt like these punctuation points on a whole decade of constant protection of spoilers.
Mm-hmm,
You know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
That they both converged in 1 month.
Yeah, at the same time. That was a huge month at AV Club. I remember us being very busy
big
that month.
Yeah, big month for the numbers at the AV Club. You know? So.
And, Game of Thrones is HBO, but Disney of the MCU, they excel at this kind of marketing, at spoiler marketing. They had a hashtag don't spoil the end game. And earlier we mentioned J.J. Abrams coming into Star Wars and the kind of weaponizing of spoilers and the way that they would dole out information, bite by bite in trailers. Disney really excels at this, and I think it relates part of, the passion for people to protect these franchises, protect them from spoilers. I think it's part of this thing that Disney also excels at, which is kind of nurturing this personal identification with brands. Where like, I'm a Star Wars person or I'm an MCU person. And it becomes part of like defending your identity, almost defending these things from spoilers.
So you're suggesting that the sort of rabid concern about not spoiling something is partially about someone leaping to the defense of this property that they've built. They've built. I don't want to say their whole identity, but they've built a lot of their interest.
A personal relationship with.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in the case of Star Wars, because when you look at Star Wars marketing, it's all about passing it down to your kids and stuff like that. Like Star Wars has become like part of the family in Disney marketing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Can I say something that I find fascinating about this current era that we're living in, in terms of the obsession with spoilers, is that we're in an era now where, let's look at Marvel, for example. We're living in an era now where the internet has made it possible to learn tons and tons of things about a movie way in advance. And that's a relatively new development in the history of the medium. There was a time in which you did not, unless you bought movie magazines like Premiere or something, and even those were not, obviously that was like a monthly thing, you did not know a lot about a movie in advance necessarily.
Right.
Now we have this whole culture where people are scouring the internet for information about a movie that's coming up. Like, people are like, what is Black Panther 2 going to be? And these little breadcrumbs of information are released, and we're part of this system too. Obviously, we will devote a whole article to something, to like one small thing that is revealed about this giant movie that's coming 2 years from now, and people obsess over this and cling to this, and I'll admit I've been guilty of, depending on the project, of following along with it too. So I'm certainly not. You're
not casting aspersions.
I'm not. I get wrapped up in it too. But I think my point is that with Marvel, for example, it's interesting to me that there is simultaneously a lot of the same people who will scour the internet for information about this new movie. They want to know everything about it, casting information, anything that's out there, will also get really bent out of shape if a critic dares to reveal something in their review that they wanted to know in advance. And I do think that is part of, I think that you're right, that there's something there that's about that's about maybe even a subconscious brand loyalty, in the sense that, like, the people who are getting up in arms about that are basically people who said, well, if it's on the internet beforehand, it's something that the studio wanted me to know. And if it's something a critic is revealing to me in a review, that breaks the contract that I have with this company. The company did not officially leak this, so the critic is to blame in this case. I just think it's bizarre that we have this, that some of the same people who will look for anything they can find on a movie that's coming out years in advance are also the same people who will get upset when they learn something they don't want to know.
Well, right, because what they're scouring for, like you said, are official studio-approved nuggets of information. And what critics are saying, is unauthorized. We're breaking the contract, like you said. And It is this, and I do think it's subconscious. I don't think people are consciously going to war on behalf of, being the foot soldiers in the Disney marketing army. I don't think people are doing it consciously, but I do think that Disney in particular really excels at developing these personal identifications with their franchise brands.
For sure.
And it affects the production of the films too. Like, I don't know if you've ever covered I covered the Star Wars Celebration when it was in Chicago a few years ago.
Okay.
And honestly, that was just an exercise in absurdity because it was this whole convention. It was like 3-4 days. And they trotted out every actor from every upcoming Star Wars thing. You know, they had the Rise of Skywalker cast come out. They had the Mandalorian cast came out. Because the Mandalorian was coming up at that time. But none of them could say anything about anything that they were in. So it was this whole production, you know, where we're celebrating Star Wars and we're finding out more about the new movies. And all anybody could say was, it was a great time. I had a great time. I love Star Wars. Like, that's really all anybody was allowed to say.
Right.
And they did show us the trailer for The Rise of Skywalker, but they had a bunch of rules about what we could, like, you know, and they didn't release it, so you just had to write down everything that happened. You know, you had to furiously scribble down everything you saw on the screen.
Yeah.
And they had all these rules about what we could and couldn't talk about. And then when The Mandalorian came out, I covered that show too. And this was an example of something we'll talk about a little bit later in the podcast, which is sometimes when you agree to view screeners of something, particularly one of these big franchise properties, you have to sign a release saying that you won't discuss X, Y, and Z in your review. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we weren't supposed to discuss after the first episode of The Mandalorian was the existence of Baby Yoda. That was supposed to be a big surprise. But then a couple days after the episode aired, they started releasing all the Baby Yoda toys online, and then they encouraged you to put Baby Yoda in the headline.
I mean, they're just trying to control the narrative, right? I mean, they're trying to control the speed in which people get this information. You know, I'm not generally a conspiracy-minded person, but I do sometimes wonder if, you know, there's all these cute stories with Marvel about how there are certain actors in that stable of that giant ensemble that makes up the MCU who are really bad about keeping secrets, and they have to be stopped from revealing things. And I sometimes wonder if that's all engineered by the company as well. Like, okay, you'll be the person who is going to let something slip, and that will feed those who need a little bit of information to keep them going towards this thing, you know? Yeah,
no, like Mark Ruffalo, who plays the Hulk.
Mark Ruffalo, yep.
A famously out of control character.
Yeah, or Tom Holland is really bad about it too, who plays Spider-Man. He's really bad about. There is a pretty funny clip of if you can stomach watching promotional material for Marvel movies, I guess there's a pretty funny, somebody put together a reel of him almost spoiling some things about Infinity War / Endgame, and Benedict Cumberbatch is often there to like step in and right the ship. But again, there's at least a small part of me, the conspiracy part of my brain, that wonders how much that's all just part of the big game that they're playing, you know?
I mean, I wouldn't even call that a conspiracy. That's just ballyhoo. That's just, you know, William Castle stuff. And like we were talking about earlier,
right.
J.J. Abrams, who has steered, you know, he's a force in that world. He's kind of the modern day king of that, right? And also,
for sure.
For Marvel, the Russo brothers, they are very intense about spoilers in their stuff. And I actually found an interview from 2018 in the Irish Times where Anthony Russo says, anything about the story constitutes a plot spoiler. Talking about Avengers Infinity War. He says that talking about anything that happens in the movie is a spoiler for the movie.
I actually don't think he's wrong with those films, and I think I complained as much when I think I did a spoiler. We have at the AV Club, for those who don't know, we have this regular feature called Spoiler Space that exists explicitly to be a place where readers can go and commenters can go to talk about the things that we can't spoil in our reviews. And I remember doing one of those for Avengers Endgame and saying kind of the challenge with Endgame is that the whole film is kind of a spoiler because it's been built as a piece of fan service that is paying off 10 years worth of prior installments. So everything in the movie in a way is a payoff. There's no setup. It's all payoff. So that becomes very difficult to write about because at a certain point, you know, you're sort of what can you write about if you can't reveal what the substance of the film is?
Right, like so and so is in it and they fight. Like, but even saying and they fight, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose the end of the logical endpoint of that argument is no reviews of Marvel films, which sometimes I wonder if they would prefer, even though they get good reviews. But
I think they like the free advertising, but yes, I don't think Disney is. I think we've seen evidence to suggest that Disney might be fine if there weren't reviews.
right. But something, talking about marketing, something that's kind of hard to avoid is putting out trailers for the films. And we kind of touched on this before, but it used to be pretty common for trailers to just give away the end of the movie. Like the trailer for Castaway, spoiler alert for Castaway, reveals that he gets off the island at the end of the movie.
Right. Yeah, I remember that one being like, well, I just feel like I watched a whole movie. That was very common at a certain point where you would watch a trailer and you'd be like, well, I don't know if I need to see this because the whole movie is in this trailer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it used to be quite common, and now, well, definitely if a trailer gives away the ending of the movie, it'll get complaints. Like, we're not even talking about blockbusters. They would never do that in a blockbuster trailer.
No.
But even for, like, a mid-level adult drama, people don't like finding out the end of the movie in the trailer anymore.
Well, you'll also see cases where something is not protecting its secret well enough. I remember that Paul Feig movie, Last Christmas. Mm-hmm. Terrible film, by the way. Really bad movie. Sorry, Paul. I like your movies normally. But speaking of Game of Thrones.
A Simple Favor was good.
Yeah, exactly. But that one had a trailer that I think, no fault of Feig's, played way too loose with there is a plot twist in that movie, and people watched the trailer and immediately guessed it, and you're sort of shit out of luck at that point as a filmmaker when the marketing has just sort of taken away your when the twist is revealed in the trailer. It's there's not a lot you can do after that.
Right.
As a filmmaker, I mean, it's just out there.
Well, that leads into a discussion of something that I was thinking about, which is what actually constitutes a spoiler. Like, the weaponized, mean-spirited version of it is super obvious. Like, I found a news story. There was a guy in Hong Kong who went to go see Avengers Endgame, and after he saw the movie, he walked out of the theater and started screaming at people waiting in line for the next showing what happened at the end of the movie, and he ended up getting his ass kicked.
Yeah. I mean, I don't condone that. That was an asshole move on his part, for sure.
Yeah, like, it's clear when someone's being a dick about it.
Right. Well, and that happened on a larger scale with Avengers as well. If you recall, information about Endgame leaked before the film's release, and people knew all of the big things that happened at the end of that movie, all of the big fan service moments. They were out there in the stratosphere, and what happened is that everybody just kind of collectively decided not to cover it, and there was this very intense circling the wagon that happened where everyone sort of agreed to protect the masses from this information that was out there. So if you wanted it, you could find it. But I feel like I didn't have that stuff spoiled for me somehow. And I work for the internet, and somehow I didn't have the big revelations that happened at the end of Endgame revealed. But there were trolls who are out there trying to explicitly spoil the film for people.
Yeah, and that's just like a clear dick move. That's just like clear just being a troll and being a jerk. Like I think, even with my mixed feelings about a lot of this sort of, industry stuff that we've been talking about on this podcast and sort of weaponizing of spoilers by marketing departments and things like that, I think that that's a dick move and you shouldn't do that kind of stuff. Like, that's very clear.
It happened with another example would be when the sixth Harry Potter book came out. Something happens at the end of the sixth Harry Potter book. If you're reading those, I actually won't spoil it for you, but there is a major thing that happens at the end of that book. And I feel like people made T-shirts that said what happens, and you're right. That is just people. That is just a mean-spirited desire to yuck other people's yum.
Yeah. So what's your personal line for spoilers? Like, my story about spoilers is a TV example. Another notorious example in the TV realm is there was one season of RuPaul's Drag Race where they revealed the winner ahead of time. The winner leaked online, and that was kind of deflating. When it comes to my reality competition shows, I don't like knowing who wins before the end, because that's like, in those type of series, that is the entertainment value, is finding out who's going to win. beyond just the spectacle of talented people doing what they're, showcasing their talents. So I don't like that. But when it comes to fiction, I don't mind spoilers at all. Even if I want to see a movie and I'm invested in it, if you told me how it ends before I saw it, it wouldn't affect my enjoyment of the movie. It really wouldn't. What about you?
I guess I would say that I do try to avoid knowing the ending of a story before I watch it. Mm-hmm. If there is something sort of crucial to the way that a story is being told and information, because if a narrative is constructed in a way that we are meant to be surprised at some point, I do like sort of having that preserved for me to a point. I sort of agree with the notion that if a movie works and a movie is doing what it should do, knowing some of what happens in it should not ruin the whole experience for you. Mm-hmm. Because when you get to the point where people feel like knowing that that Hawkeye loses his family at the beginning of Endgame. Sorry, people. It happens in the very first scene. I tried to resist. But the fact that Hawkeye is in the first scene of Endgame and he loses his family, if knowing that spoils that for you, that either says something about your relationship to this piece of work and what matters to you about it, mm-hmm. or it says something about the piece of work itself, which in the case of something like Endgame really is just a series of revelations. So for me, I don't know. I mean, I can't say that that there aren't stories that I would not be disappointed to learn the ending of. I mean, we talked mm-hmm. about Game of Thrones earlier. I'm really glad that the scene that may or may not happen at a celebration of some sort, a happy occasion, I am really glad that I did not know that happened in advance. Mm-hmm. Another example would be I somehow managed to see The Sixth Sense in its second weekend without knowing what happens at the end of that film. And I gotta say, that was an amazing moment to experience that live. And I don't know a lot of people who actually, I talked to so many people who had that twist ruined for them. Mm-hmm. And it was special to experience it without being told. So I do think that part of the pleasure of any story is not knowing where it's going. I'm always talking about, like, if something is unpredictable, that's really exciting to me as a critic when I'm writing mm-hmm. about a film. Not knowing where something's going is really exciting. So having that knowledge in advance, it can diminish the work a little bit for me. I'll say.
Well, an example, you talked about that sort of like a tacit agreement among reviewers not to, link out to those Endgame spoilers. A film where there was a tacit agreement where you specifically kept a secret close to your chest because you saw this movie at its premiere and I didn't see it until 4 months later at a different festival, is Hereditary.
Yeah.
The marketing did not even imply that there was a big shocking scene in it. Yes. None of the reviews even implied that this scene existed. And then when I saw the movie, I was like, oh my God, like it really did take me by surprise. And that did enhance my enjoyment of the movie because like you said, it made me feel like, oh my God, what's going to happen now?
Right. And that's exciting. I mean, that is exciting. And that is a moment that I'm glad that critics mostly preserved. And honestly, it happens fairly early in the film. It's not something that it's not the ending. You know, if one were to reveal in a review, they would not be revealing the ending. But it's something that feels crucial to the way that you experience the film.
Mm-hmm. Well, that being said, when I say I don't mind having movies spoiled for me, I think that speaks to another thing that I think about criticism and being a critic, which is that you're not just recounting what happens in a movie in a review. Right. You're talking about a lot of other things. You're talking about the music, the cinematography, the acting, the dialogue. There's so much that if a film is well made and was thoughtfully made, that there's going to be so much texture in it that the plot is not the only pleasure of the film. There
are some movies that I think are sort of inherently spoiler proof because mm-hmm. there's no plot development in it that would be shocking enough that it would ruin it for audiences to know that it happens, you know?
Right. Like, one of your best films of last year was Vitalina Varena, which is a quiet character study, and like, the pleasure in that is spending time with the character, right? And so, like, yes. you couldn't spoil it by knowing the ending.
There's literally nothing I think I could say about that movie that would spoil it. I mean, for one, it's just not plot driven for one thing, but there's just the plot is simple enough, and there aren't surprises. There are not big twists in it. It's not about that, and yeah, I think there's a lot of movies that are like that, to be honest, where you can feel free to discuss the content of the film because the movie is not trying at any point to pull the rug out from anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so do you think like a spoiler is like a twist? Are they the same thing?
I don't know if they're exclusively the same thing, honestly, because I do think there's such a thing as just not wanting to know where a plot goes. You know, like a character dying at the end of the film that they're in is not necessarily a twist. You know, a twist implies. I think a twist implies expectations, and it implies that the story is leading you in one direction and then takes you in another one. A character dying at the end does not qualify as a twist. I would not say the way that well, you know, I'm not going to get specific because I actually don't feel the need to necessarily spoil something randomly in this moment. But if you're doing a television show and it turns out at the end of that show your main character dies, that's not a twist unless it happens in a way like the very fact that a character dies is not a twist. So
yeah,
but it could still be a spoiler.
There's two big prestige TV shows I can think of where the final moments of the final episode did have spoilers in them. Right.
Yeah. And, you know, honestly, if somebody's been watching a show for several years, I think maybe writing about it, I would at least say that if you're doing a standard review, then I mean, maybe that's what it comes down to. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if this is exactly where this conversation was headed, but I think what it comes down to is the way that people approach reviews and how we choose to present a piece of writing about a film or a television show. Because I think the standard review, or in TV terms, maybe the standard recap, recap is different because recap is sort of the general notion in a recap is that the people who are reading it and people who are reading it have presumably watched the thing, and this is more like a post. And some would say that that's movie reviews really are meant to be consumed after you see something. But I think that's not the way a lot of people consume them, honestly.
I wouldn't write with that in mind because
no,
like
I certainly don't.
Yeah.
I mean, you're kind of, for one thing, because they usually come out before the movie comes out, and a lot of it comes down to discussing something that people will see and giving them a sense of. I mean, I hate the idea of reviews purely as a service or purely as should you see this or not see this. I always hate when people boil a piece of criticism down to that, even though I think some criticism does serve that function. I just hate the notion that I mean, I hate that our job is to tell people. I hate that in some people's eyes, our job is simply to tell people to see something or not. I mean, I think it's a lot more complicated than that. It's about wrestling with a film.
Yeah.
But I think that, I guess I would say, I think that expectation is there, though. People do, when they read a review, they often are, it's about finding out what a film is, and it's sometimes about finding out what a film is, gaining information about a film before seeing it. Sometimes a review will serve to even let someone know that something exists at all. You know?
Right.
So I do think that there's a certain responsibility when you're writing that to not just completely run through the entire plot of something.
No, I think it's pretty artless when you read a review that is basically just a summation of the plot. I think that is, you know, that's not as thoughtful as I would like for a review to be. Well, I think that that's one of the things that you're aiming for in a movie review. But like you said, it is more complex. And you think like, because when I'm writing a review, I am saying whether or not to see it to an extent, but I'm also more specifically saying who would like this and what they would like about it, you know, because people have different tastes. And you could be like, well, if you like this type of movie, then you won't like this particular movie because it's not in the same league as other examples in the genre that we've seen and things like that. But I think that, you know, trying to give people advice on whether they would like something based on X, Y, and Z factors, I think that is part of the reviewer's job.
Yeah, I mean, giving someone a sense, because there's a lot of options out there these days, and giving someone, I think what it comes down to is giving somebody a sense of what something is. I actually think that is a big part of what criticism is, and a kind of underrated part, is really trying to give somebody a sense of what they're going to experience. And sometimes that means evoking the tone of it in the writing, but it really, for me, when I approach a film, I really kind of want to turn it inside out, and I want to figure out how it works. I want to like look under the hood of a film and tinker around and sort of explain what a film is in a sense. And I think you can go overboard with that. And I think one of the easier ways to do that is to lay out from end to end everything that happens in a film. I just try to avoid that personally, but I'm not perfect about the line. I think there are times when I've probably gone a little bit too far in revealing what happens in something. And I think there are other times when I've probably been a little bit too skittish about. I remember one specifically that sticks out for me is writing about Foxcatcher when that came out, a movie I did not care for, but feeling inclined to protect the ending of that film, even though it's based on a true story. It put me in a position where I could not. My criticisms of the film had to be sort of necessarily vague in order to protect the destination of the film, even though, again, you're talking about something that is based in fact. Now, whether people go into that knowing it is another story, but like, at what point do we have a responsibility to protect a true story that something is based on, you know?
Sure. Well, these are both, I think when I'm writing a review, usually I will summarize, take a paragraph to summarize at least the setup of the story. I hardly ever go into, the ins and outs. When you look at it as a 3-act structure, I'll describe the first act, but then the second and third I'll just kind of leave out. I hardly ever, like, if I refer to the ending of a film in a review, I'll just say like, it's disappointing, or it's exciting, like you might use an adjective to describe it, but you definitely won't say what happens. And 2 films I was thinking of that I reviewed that I really wanted to talk about the ending of it because it was very provocative, but I really felt I couldn't, at least in my main reviews, were Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That is a separate discussion. And Promising Young Woman, I didn't mention the ending of that movie at all in my review, even though it is very, very provocative. For sure. Those were 2 examples where I felt like preserving the sense of surprise was kind of my obligation to the story.
But then at what point, as writers, are we being hemmed in by this responsibility to not... I mean, because a lot about criticism is about getting into the meat of what this film is, because can you make like if your feelings about Promising Young Woman, if your ultimate conclusions about it rest at least partially on the ending, how can you really convey your full thoughts about what a movie is and how well it does what it does without getting into the ending? I'm sort of posing that in the air because I do this job too, and I understand that responsibility. I would not reveal the ending to that film in a piece of had I reviewed it, I would not reveal the ending to that film. Had I reviewed Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I actually did write about from Cannes and tried to avoid talking about the ending much, I do think that it might also depend on where, like, what publication you're writing for too, because I think it's assumed that the type of reviewing we do is at least designed to be read in a timely fashion. I mean, we are playing a part of the criticism system that exists, at least partially, to direct people towards something or direct them away from it. Whereas there are publications like something like Reverse Shot, which I feel like for one thing, they don't even always review things when they're brand new, but I think there is this understanding that people who go to that site are reading something that's longer and more thorough, and that is not concerned about protecting information.
Right, like the difference between something on comicbook.com and something in Film Comment, right? I think we split the difference between those 2 poles of writing about films. Well, I think actually discussing the ending of those films responsibly is possible, but I think the way that we do it, where you have spoiler space, where you have a separate article specifically to discuss the ending of something, is the responsible way to do that, because then it says right on top, spoiler space. And you don't give it away in the headline up top or anything, and it says spoiler space. This is the spoiler area where we talk about the spoiler. But it's funny because the expectations are so crazy now that I wrote a spoiler space for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that just said, let's talk about the ending of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I got these angry responses on Twitter. They were like, how dare you talk about the ending? I was like, you don't have to click on it, man.
I know, it's at the top. Well, not only that, Sony sent us an email about that article and basically said, can you take that down? And the thing about it is that it was marked as a spoiler space. Like, basically, the headline of the piece was, let's talk about the ending of this movie. We also waited until the movie was already in theaters before we released it. There was no way. Basically, and then there's a huge spoiler tag at the top. It basically was us saying, it's like, people want to talk about the ending of this movie. It is a point of conversation. There are people out there who want to get into it. We're going to get into it, but we marked it as responsibly as possible. And I think we've seen, I mean, studios are playing a part in being in trying to police this. I think it's gotten a little out of control in some recent years, the extent to which studios will try to prevent critics from writing about aspects of a film. A great example, I would say, is Blade Runner 2049, and I will admit that I ignored one of the guidelines that they set in that review.
Yeah. For people who aren't familiar with this, with reviews for Blade Runner 2049, the studio sent out one of these detailed lists of spoilers to avoid you're talking about, and I'm just going to read it real quick. And when I'm going to say blank for all the parts that you weren't supposed to reveal. Now that you've seen the film, the filmmakers ask that you do your best to abide by the following as much as possible. Please do not mention any blank, including references to blank. Do not mention that there are blank to blank. Do not reveal the fate of any of the characters. Do not confirm who is a human and who is not, as is the long-standing tradition with this franchise. Do not mention that blank, what blank discovers at blank, or any of the blank that blank. Do not mention that blank, if asked about blank. Please say we meet many striking characters over the course of the film, and blank is one of them.
Yeah,
so there's a long list.
That shit's ridiculous, honestly. And, like, I think that there is a line between... I personally do not like studios trying to police this at all. I think this is something that critics should be able to approach responsibly. Maybe some don't. But I think trying to tell us what we can or cannot write about is kind of ridiculous. I think that just showing it, I mean, if you don't want to show it to us in advance because you're worried that we're gonna ruin it, so be it. Or you can set the embargo to when the film opens. You can say that we'll show it to you, but reviews can't run until the movie's actually in theaters. They do that occasionally, and I think, as far as I'm concerned, that's fair play. Trying to control what we do or do not say about the film in advance, to me, seems unreasonable. And I will say that in the case of Blade Runner 2049, one of those things that they asked us not to reveal is revealed in the film itself in the first 10 minutes of the movie.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I guess I would say that the notion that in the grand tradition of Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner does not come down on one side. I mean, it's been a topic of speculation for as long as the movie has existed, whether or not a certain character is human or not. That is built into the ambiguity of the film. To try to suggest that is the same as us as reviewers protecting the identity of a character that the movie is very explicit about whether or not they are human is fucking ridiculous. And that one annoyed me a lot. And there was some, I remember revealing that certain piece of information in the review and getting some backlash from a few readers, and it's just like, I'm sorry, but at a certain point, as a reader, if you do not want to know something that is revealed in the first 10 minutes of a film, do not read the reviews.
Yeah, like I was saying before, like, I feel like first act setup is fair game in a review.
Yes, exactly. The first act is fair game. If we cannot discuss anything about the plot of a film, there's no point in writing about it, I think. A narrative film, at least. You know, there's no point in even writing about it. And if you don't want to learn anything about a film in advance, if you want to know nothing that happens in the plot of a film, including things that happen in the first half an hour of the film, don't read reviews, period.
Oh, well, you know, we were talking about spoiler space as a way to responsibly discuss, you know, a film like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that has there was a lot to get into in the ending of that film, you know. I think another thing that we do sometimes, and I've done this with interviews a couple times. There was one I did an interview with, to bring back to Hereditary, I did an interview with Ari Aster, the director of that film, and I wanted to ask him about the big reveal. And so we held that review until after the film had been out for a few days before we ran that interview. And in big bold letters at the top, it says, "We talk about the ending. If you haven't seen it yet, do not read this." Like, I pushed people away from my own interview.
Yeah. No, and I think that's responsible, honestly. I think that's the responsible way to do it. I mean, another way publications will often do it is when you reach a point in the review when there's about to be a piece of sensitive information, in bold letters, capital letters, bolded or something, it'll say spoiler warning here or something. I think sometimes people go a little far with that, where it's literally like disrupting the flow of the piece. That offends me as a writer and as an editor. I'll say that occasionally, where you're disrupting the whole momentum and flow of your piece to call out the fact that you're about to reveal something, people will be like, okay, come back after the next sentence. Okay, we good now? All right.
Yeah,
and I'm just like,
Yeah. I like to do it above the fold in newspaper parlance, where it's at the very top.
Yeah.
And because I feel like once you've pulled up an article and you're scrolling through the article, if it says stop reading here, like that next paragraph's already up on your phone or on your computer or whatever. And so it's, your eyes are probably going to go there. But if it says right on top, then you can just not read the article at all.
Right. If you were concerned about spoilers and a piece calls out spoilers and you continue reading, you have nobody to blame but yourself.
Well, here's a question that I see people discuss a lot that I think is interesting. Like, what the cultural ubiquity of a story, does that factor into whether or not you can spoil it? Like, if you had never read the Bible, the New Testament kind of has a surprise ending, doesn't it?
Yes, so it does.
Like, are you spoiling the Bible when you say he is risen? You know what I mean?
Yeah. The Bible. Are you saying that the Bible is the original Avengers Endgame? The proto Avengers Endgame?
Maybe. Or like, are you spoiling the end of Romeo and Juliet when you say that it's, about teen suicide? Like,
yeah.
Because these stories are so woven into the fabric of our culture that I find it difficult to, and even The Empire Strikes Back, even Star Wars is so embedded into the culture that I find it hard to believe that you wouldn't already know how those stories end.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like there's a statute of limitations at a certain point. I mean, even the fact that we've decided in this episode to not reveal, when we talked briefly about The Sixth Sense earlier, even the fact that most people out there by now know the way that The Sixth Sense ends, and it was probably excessively cautious to protect that information because the movie is now more than 20 years old. I think that at a certain point, you reach a point where if something has been around for long enough, you kind of lose your ability to demand that everyone protect information about it. It's kind of how I feel about it.
Like, what's the statute of limitations? Do you just kind of feel it out, or is it like 5 years, 20 years, 40 years,
It's tough to say. I mean, I think it's kind of a case by case, because honestly, if you could somehow manage to go into Psycho, to bring it back to Psycho, without knowing, I guess, what it reveals about the villain at the end and what happens about 40 minutes into the film, I would love to protect that for people, honestly. I would love for people to be able to see that maybe there's a new generation of budding movie lovers who don't know what happens in Psycho. And if that's the case, watch the film and think about how shocking this film must have been in an era long before we had tons of twist endings in thrillers. And just think about how this would have felt to experience it then. And just enjoy the surprise that comes with it, but at the same time, we have to balance that with what audience are we writing for, and if by constantly moving around the edges of plots of films that have been around for decades or longer. If that's preventing you from actually getting into what this thing is and really digging into it critically, then I'm afraid I'm probably just going to have to spoil it for you in that case.
Well, that's all we've got for you this week. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Film Club wherever you get your podcasts.
This week's episode of Film Club was hosted by me, Alex Dowd, and by Katie Rife. It was produced and edited by Carl Blomberg. Our sound mixer and finishing editor is Seth Hafer, and our motion graphics designer is Julie Mullins. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode talking about this year's Sundance Film Festival. Thanks, folks.
See you then.